Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. You can also get it on SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, Audio Boom, all of those random, podcasting websites that people listen to. I'm sure we're up on right now. This is the Friday podcast. We are continuing in our series of preparing for the NBA draft and NBA offseason. We're going to do the Dallas Mavericks first here, and then we are going to do the Utah Jazz second. To do the Dallas Mavericks, I've brought on Tim Cato from over at SB Nation. Tony Jones is going to be joining the show later on to talk Utah Jazz and their wild situation. But first, let's talk to Tim and figure out where exactly Dallas is going, because I'm not entirely sure what to think of their situation. So how is it going, Tim?
I'm doing really well, and it was a strange year to be a Mavericks guy and to kind of follow that team. I think this is the second time they've missed the playoffs since 2000, which still blows my mind. But it's a wild team. But no, it's definitely a combination of kind of a Dirk retirement tour. That's not quite the right word, but we're obviously working towards Dirk's retirement, and the team is trying to rebuild around him so that they have a team. When he does end up retiring, which might be after this coming season or next season. But I would say they did a decent job of it. They kind of got the Nerlens Noel trade out of nowhere, which surprised me as someone who said, the Sixers just wouldn't do something like that. So, in that sense, I think they had a productive year when they acquired another young piece that they can kind of build towards in the future.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I want to talk about all of that, what you just said. Let's set the stage real quick on what happened with the Dallas Mavericks, in case you missed it this year and did not tune in to the 33-49 team. They missed the playoffs, 25th in offensive rating at 105.6, 15th in defensive rating at 108.8, so a minus 3.2 net rating. Weird statistical profile, weird team to watch in a lot of ways this year because they played really, really slow. They chucked a ton of threes, and they were the worst offensive rebounding team in NBA history. The defense was hyper. It wasn't even like hyper aggressive, but they ended up forcing a ton of turnovers. They gave up a super high percentage from the field to kind of even out how their defense ended up being 15th in the NBA. Kind of just run me through what your impressions were of watching this team this season, even beyond, not even the Dirk farewell tour, but it was just a very strange roster and a very strange team.
It was, yeah. You kind of had to look at the season in probably three parts, I would say. The first part, I think they started 4-17, which was the worst start since the 90s. That was a team that was dealing with injuries. That was a team that was trying to run Andrew Bogut out there at times. They still had Darren Williams, and they were just straight up bad. And they had some they're unlucky at times, but that was just a bad, not fun, not interesting team to watch at all. I think it was about mid-December is when Dirk came back. Seth Curry was injured for a little bit, and he came back around then. And the team actually started picking up a little bit, and they started to figure out, a more reasonable playing style, and that was when the when the pace was kind of established, where it was a really slow pace, but and the team was able to defend all right and score all right. Seth Curry was really a revelation, and he broke out, during the middle of the season, and now he's, like a legitimate building block going forwards, especially since he's only making, I think, $3 million next season, which is one of the steals of the league. So kind of that middle third of the season, there was a lot of talk about this team, was trying to make the playoffs, and because the race for the 8th seed was so historically bad in the West, that hope was kept alive for a while. But then as the team couldn't quite get there, they couldn't get more than, I think, 2 or 3 games out. In the last third of the season, it was a lot of, this team is not going to get there. There's still some people holding out hope, but it was, the realism was that the team was not going to get there, and so they tried out a lot of players on 10-day contracts and had random people can't come through. They had the Yogi Ferrell experience come out of nowhere, which was fun, and as the season kind of wound down on him, you realize that he's a nice player to have, but he's also probably not much more than a backup point guard. So there was it was definitely a segmented season. There was 3 clear kind of paths, and then Cuban even admitted recently that in the final week, on the final few weeks, they actively tried to lose. And tried to tank and ended up not moving up or anything. But the 9th pick is the highest pick they've had in a decade. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But yeah, it was definitely an odd season, and for Mavericks fans who expect this team to make the playoffs, somehow squeeze in every year, it was weird to be running from behind the entire time. But it's probably going to be best for the team in the big picture in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to contrast them with a team like Atlanta, for instance, right? Who has, for so many years, kept the status quo and just decided to, we're going to run out a team that's going to be competitive and make the playoffs every year. Dallas has done that over the course of the last couple of years, but it seemed like this year they really made a decision, especially late in the year, as you mentioned, that, this team is not good enough to make the playoffs, let alone make a, sustained playoff run. And it makes sense sometimes in the NBA as it's currently constructed to try and lose basketball games essentially and to try and build for the future as opposed to try and wring every last drop you can out of the Dirk Nowitzki era. Yeah,
it does. And there's no shame in that. It's too bad they couldn't sneak a little bit higher than they did. We were all excited. The one thing people were excited about in that first third or the first, I think 20 or so games was that, maybe they'd have a chance at Markelle Fultz or somebody like that. And that's probably going to be a bit of a franchise changing player or, certainly one that really impacts, your future. But, I'll take they'll take the 9th seed. I'll take or not the 9th seed, the 9th pick. They'll definitely take that. Hopefully there's somebody that drops to them that's they can add to the score that they have, which is they don't really have a superstar to replace Dirk, but Harrison Barnes is a piece you can build around. Nerlens is, and Seth Curry has kind of developed into a player like that too. I think by his strong play. So
yeah, to kind of bring this full circle and kind of end the season recap portion of this. I did really like what I saw from Harrison Barnes this year. He averaged 19 points, 5 rebounds a game, was more efficient than I think many people anticipated, especially early in the year, whenever he came from Golden State and was still trying to get I don't want to say get his feet under him because, he was so called upon with Golden State to just be competent for a team that was competing for an NBA championship throughout his first 4 years. But, he was better than I anticipated at being a number one option for, a solid portion of the season for Dallas.
Yeah, and same here. I had I wasn't totally out on the guy, but I didn't see him ever having a chance to reach his max player potential that they signed him out, and I'm still not sure he did it this season, but certainly got a lot closer than I expected. He was much better in isolation than anybody in my opinion than anyone could have foreseen. Mm-hmm. And he really showed things that he never showed in with the Warriors, just the ability to be more creative with his offensive movements and handle the ball a little bit better than he had shown in the past. So yeah, it was an amazing season for him in the sense that, especially the way he came over and Dirk was out early in the year and he right away was just putting up 20-25 points, and he's not going to be someone who puts up 40-50 point nights, but just the way he was the way he was able to be so steady and so consistent is something that that's a desirable asset, and certainly he's a solid piece, and he's a useful piece for the Mavericks as they head forwards.
Yeah. So let's move into the offseason here, and I think that kind of an interesting way to go about discussing what's going to happen with the Mavericks here is by going through their free agents, given the fact that it feels like 3/4 of the roster last season at the end of the year is going to have some sort of team option or non-guaranteed deal or restricted free agency to deal with. So Dirk Nowitzki has a team option at $25 million a year. You do think that he will be back and not retire. That is correct, yes?
Yeah, he has all but confirmed it, or he may have actually, just about confirmed it. It's possible he opts out and takes a little bit smaller of a deal. But I do think he's going to get his money, to a certain extent, like he did this season.
Mm-hmm. So Devin Harris at $4.2 million option. It's about 30% guaranteed. I think it's like a $1.4 million that has already been guaranteed to him. What do we think that the Devin Harris era is going to bring in the future here for Dallas? I would imagine that that's probably over, even though $4.2 million is fair, I guess.
Yeah, it's not a bad deal, but I do think they decline it. They have JJ Barea as a veteran guard, and now they have a few more guards, and there's a good chance they draft one. So I would imagine they decline that one. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah. So Salah Mejri, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nicholas Brusino, Jared Uthoff, I think all of those guys have non-guaranteed deals. Dorian Finney-Smith was a pretty interesting find, I thought, off of the undrafted free agency. Not even like scrap heap, because there were a lot of undrafted free agents this year that made the NBA, but he was among the best. He ends up starting like half the season for Dallas. And I don't think he's a building block or anything, but I do think that he's at least shown that, he can eat up minutes and is worthwhile on a $1 million contract next year.
Yeah, I agree. He was useful defender. If he can ever shoot, he shot 29% this season from three. If he can get that up to 33, 34, then, he's probably a low-end rotation player for someone. But, he's not someone the Mavs, have to, definitely not a future piece, but, keep him around for a year. Absolutely. He's definitely useful for that and has earned that much.
Yeah. And I mean, like Salah Mejri, Nicholas Brusino, Jared Uthoff, I would imagine that, it's just going to depend how the offseason goes for them. Like, it's going to depend on, so many different factors in terms of whether or not they end up keeping these guys, letting them go. The Mavericks organization has shown in the past, for instance, with Maurice Endor, that they don't mind eating a little bit of money later on, just to keep guys around and keep talent around to, take chances on guys, so to speak.
Yeah, I would guess that all three of those are back, but it definitely depends on the summer, and they're not guarantees by any means.
Yeah, and then Yogi Ferrell and DeAndre Liggins both have team options. I would definitely think Yogi Ferrell's will be exercised. DeAndre Liggins, probably worth exercising, because I think he's been an NBA player that's been playing in the D League, really for the last 4 years or whatever. He's a really, really good defender, really useful guy, at least on that end of the floor. But what do you think ends up happening with those two, I guess?
Yeah, Yogi will almost guaranteed to be back. The only problem with Liggins is he might be a little bit redundant with Dorian Finney-Smith, as he's kind of a wing defender who can't quite shoot well enough.
Yep.
So I guess that's the big question. He only played one game here. They picked him up at the very, the Cavs cut him at the very end of the year, and that's when they grabbed him, just to have his rights throughout the summer. So I don't know if he can still be on summer league teams. He might have reached his quota. If he'll definitely be working out with them over the summer and probably entering training camp with them, and then they can make their decision from there. So I would lean no, but I'm not ruling it out either.
Yeah. So the last guy here is obviously Nerlens Noel. Let's kind of talk about just what you saw from him in Dallas. I am personally terrified by his next contract, because he is a guy that is probably going to come closer to max money, or even potentially get max money, than I would be willing to pay, I guess, is the best way to put it. He's a guy that you talk to people around the league, no one really has a ton of trust in him, I guess, to really eventually reach his ceiling. You look at the tools and they're incredible. Really good rim protector, can move on the perimeter better than maybe any big man in the NBA, can be an all defensive team caliber player, but you always just wonder if the sum is ever going to equal the parts, right? So what's I guess your feeling on the way that the Mavericks should handle the Nerlens Noel situation this summer?
Yeah, he's definitely going to be back. I think we all know that. The question is how much it is. He's a restricted free agent, so they have leverage there, that they can wait it out for a while. They can wait till even drag into August if they have a certain number they're kind of angling for and want to slowly meet in the middle with Nerlens camp. But he's also a 23-year-old kid. I agree he has some off the court issues that he's been bringing with him from Philadelphia. Some concerns about just the way he acted and some stuff that with Randall House and some other just baggage, as you can call it. But I do tend to think that I don't think he's going to be a max guy. I do agree that he's going to probably get closer than the Mavericks would want or anybody else would want. But at the same time, I guess it's just a matter of you traded for him. You've seen him around for a few months now. You just have to kind of trust him and trust your staff to kind of push him in the right directions and all of that stuff. At least from my experience being around him in the locker room, he came across as a more mature guy than maybe you would have expected from those stories and stuff. So maybe he did hit a turning point. I've heard we saw it happen with Joel Embiid. Just to with another Sixers guy right on the mind, where early on he was a guy who didn't want to work out and stuff like that, and people kind of say behind the scenes that he's done a 180 on that. So maybe who knows, maybe even that exposure to Embiid in the first half of the season helped Noel, seeing what Embiid was able to be. And the Mavericks tend to have a short leash, or usually they only invest in maybe one project at once in terms of a player who's maybe a bit of a knucklehead, and Nerlens certainly isn't that on the court. Maybe off the court there's been a few concerns, but again he's 23, so the hope in the things that the Mavericks are kind of seeing is that maybe he's at that corner. He's really dedicated to the sport and to basketball, and the biggest question going forward hopefully is just whether he can stay healthy, and he was mostly able to do that this season.
Yeah, I mean, the big key, I think, is obviously maturity. It's health, as you just mentioned. This is a guy that's now had, I guess, is it 2 or 3 knee surgeries?
I think it's 3. Yes, it's in that number, and a little bit concerning for sure.
Yeah, that's scary. I mean, just the general lack of development in 4 years of his offensive profile is a little bit scary to me as well. The defense is always going to be there when he's on the floor. I'm not real worried about that. I guess, though, that in NBA that is increasingly big man heavy, it seems like, as we continue to have all of these big men enter the NBA, as the league itself continues to try and downsize more and more. Paying $20 to $25 million a year for a center is, especially one that's limited offensively, is less and less appealing to me, I guess.
Yeah, I understand that. He's not like Hassan Whiteside in the sense that I saw there's the times where he's shocked me where he could lead a fast break and dribble and fake. Even there's one time I think he faked out a guard and kind of Euro stepped in for the layup. Just he's shown some flashes of stuff like that. I guess not being in Philadelphia, or not following him, every day before that, maybe he's always kind of shown this stuff, and it's the matter of him taking another small step. So yeah. I don't think it's impossible for him to add a more well-rounded game, but I agree the concern is not he's always had that potential. It's the matter of actually stepping out and doing that. So I don't know. I think he's worth the gamble. I like a lot of stuff about him. But I get the other side and that there are some concerns there.
Yeah, so let's just kind of move on and move forward in this discussion. Because as I mentioned to you before the podcast, I'm trying to limit these to not going 50 minutes like I did with Adam Mares and Brad Rowland.
Those guys do like to talk.
Yeah, and so do I, so it's a problem. So I guess that my question is, where do you think this team is going right now? Do you think that they genuinely want to try and compete for a playoff spot next year? Do you think that they want to try and make a splash in free agency? Because like you said, they're going to have something like $14 million or so in cap space, even with Nerlens Noel's cap hit on the books. And then depending on what they can convince Dirk to do, maybe take a little bit less money. It wouldn't be crazy to see them be able to open up even more cap space here to go out and sign another guy. So what do you think they want to do?
Yeah, one of the early reports is that they're looking at Jrue Holiday as a name. And I do tend to think that if they can add, a really solid point guard like that, Jrue Holiday or George Hill or, another just very solid point guard, that this is, probably a playoff team. Definitely not guaranteed to sneak in there, but, from about January to, mid-March, they played at a 5 or 6 games over 500 pace, and they had a lot of stats that were kind of going in their favor. So I think that they showed signs this season at their best, when everybody was healthy and when they weren't trying to tank, and when you ignored that really bad start when everyone was injured, that they looked like a team that could definitely be in the playoffs. And I do think they owe that to Dirk. They owe him one more playoff push. There's not much they could do about this season. It was kind of doomed from the start by that start. But with Dirk on the roster another year, at least one more year, I think you definitely have to do your best and push for the playoffs. And even if the team, maybe the best thing for the team would be to get another high draft pick, but I just don't think that's very possible with the way they're wrapped, that they're built. And I also am not convinced that would be the best option, to be honest, because they played their young good players during the middle of the season, and they weren't losing. It wasn't like they kept running veterans out there. They ended up cutting and trading Darren Williams and Andrew Bogut. They still were winning games by starting Seth Curry and Dorian Finney-Smith and Yogi Ferrell and Harrison Barnes. And when you're doing that, it's hard to say. It's hard. You can't tell those guys not to win. The way to tank has always been to play young players who just aren't there yet. And those players kept showing by winning that they, to some degree, they were there. I do think that's the best case scenario. I do think that if they can, sneak into the 6, 7, 8 seed, then that's probably, the way to have the most successful season next season. That's probably their best case scenario. And, hopefully they pick up a point guard in the draft that they can kind of develop for the future. But, they may be looking for one as well in free agency to kind of take the reins there, take the lead there for a few seasons. And if they can do that, I do feel pretty confidently about their ability to make a strong playoff push.
Oh man, you are much higher on this roster than I am. Not in like a terribly different way, but yeah. I think that you definitely feel a little bit more confidence in what the Mavericks have cooking right now than I do.
For sure. And a lot of it is because I saw it happen. And I agree, if you look at it on paper, there's questions, but I saw enough in the 41 games. I think they actually tried and were healthy. I saw enough there that it's hard for me to say that's going to go the opposite way. But I get where you're coming from too.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that you're by any stretch of the imagination going to be wrong on this. Or it's a really tough situation because, like you said, they do owe Dirk something. They don't want to tank while this franchise beacon is on the roster, right? It's not really fair to him for that to happen. So let's kind of talk about the draft here, and we can kind of talk about another part of this that I think is interesting and that they could explore. But at number 9 overall, they do not have a second round pick. I believe they only have 1 second round pick in the next 4 years. That's fine though. They have all their first round picks and they can buy back into the second round if they really want someone. And they've really done well, as I said, on the undrafted free agent market this year, and really in the past as well. So they can find guys and that's okay. But, number 9, you keep bringing up point guard, and I think that is ultimately what they would like to happen as well. I think that guys like Dennis Smith, and if De'Aaron Fox was to fall, and Lonzo Ball and Markelle Fultz, I think would really, really make sense for them. But I guess that my question is, what happens, do you think, if those guys don't fall? Do you think that they take a chance on a Frank Ntilikina out of France? Do you think that they maybe look elsewhere? Do you think that they could reach for someone like a Donovan Mitchell and try and make him a point guard? Where are you kind of sensing the organization is in terms of the draft?
I heard early in the year that they really liked Dennis Smith, so I do think that if he were to fall, that's somebody they would very, very strongly consider. Frank Ntilikina is definitely a name that also is, they've always been fans of international prospects because of Donnie Nelson, who's always been very internationally focused. They drafted the last French point guard they drafted, Roddy Beaubois. I'm never going to be off the bandwagon. I always feel like he had a chance to make it.
Strong agree.
Injuries robbed him of that. But Ntilikina, I guess it is. Seems a little bit like him in a few ways, except a little bit taller and a little bit sturdier, hopefully. So if they have the same opinion, I haven't aggressively looked at his scouting report, and a lot of it you can't tell because he's the leagues he's playing in and stuff like that. But if they come to the same conclusion about Frank, then I think that's definitely a player they could draft. But beyond that, it's tricky. 9 is definitely a spot or two below where you would like to be if, like somebody like De'Aaron Fox could potentially fall to maybe 7, but I'm not sure he's going to get past that.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So, Dennis Smith is probably the person I would, would be the player I would look for the most on this team and hope that he falls for them. But past that, I could see someone like Frank. I could see them taking a chance on a Lauri Markkanen, or I could even see them going down to OG Anunoby or someone like that. It's a tricky spot. I could even see them trading it at that point if they don't have a Dennis Smith fall to them. So it's not a couple spots up would be ideal, but they're going to get a good prospect hopefully. Jonathan Isaac is the other guy, but it sounds like he's definitely in the pushing towards the top 5 these days. So, I don't think that's going to happen. So, I don't think it has to be point guard if there's not a point guard you like, especially if they're trying to fill it in free agency. But, it would be nice because that's the one spot they don't really have someone at right now.
Yeah, I think that number 1 on my board, you mentioned him, Dennis Smith. I think that he makes a lot of sense for them. A guy who can score at all 3 levels, really help their offense basically immediately. That would be a really good fit in my opinion. I'm just assuming that De'Aaron Fox is gone by the time they roll around at number 9. I'd probably look at Jonathan Isaac at number 2 on my board for them. Does, like similar things to, Harrison Barnes, and they played Wes Matthews a bunch at the 3 this year. And, we've mentioned Dorian Finney-Smith and DeAndre Liggins, even though I don't think those guys should stop you from taking a Jonathan Isaac if you really like him. I have Isaac at number 5 on my board. I think he's a really, really good basketball player defensively. And Dallas, I think, would do a great job to get the most out of him. They're so good at developing players down there. Rick Carlisle does a great job. They really foster players. And the one thing that Isaac, you have to worry about is he going to be a competent offensive basketball player? And I think Rick Carlisle will do a great job of, instilling that confidence in him. Number 3, maybe Malik Monk for me. If he would fall, again, I'm a little bit questionable on whether or not he would fall to number 9. Just an elite scorer. I think that they could always use that. Again, number 25 in offense last year. Ntilikina, I think, would be number 4. The other 3 I have somewhere between 5 through 8 on my board, so theoretically would not fall to Dallas at number 9. Ntilikina I have at number 9. I think that he makes a lot of sense as a point guard, developmental, near 7-foot wingspan, 6'5". The key is going to be how he develops athletically because he's still 18 years old, still filling out his really long frame. And then number 5 is Lauri Markkanen for me. I really just believe that Nerlens Noel could do a lot to cover up his weaknesses. And if you can do that, you can just let Lowry go and let him score and let him run off screens and do a lot of the things that he does so well. And I think that if it came down to Frank and Lowry, it would be really, really tight for me. And I'm not sure which direction I would go because I think that Lauri Markkanen, and I've mentioned this on multiple podcasts, has a chance to step in and be, outside of Dirk, the best shooting center in the NBA, basically from day one that he enters the league. And that's saying a lot, but I think it speaks to how insane of a shooter he is and how much utility his shot has. And I think that those are the guys that I'm looking at. Those are the guys that I think, make sense at number 9 for Dallas. I can't really see a situation where none of those guys is on the board.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I have some worries about Markkanen just in the sense that that's not where the NBA is going, and that's his main concern for everyone. I'm sure is just that he's not quite versatile enough. But certainly they've known how to play with Dirk for 2 decades now, and he's not Dirk, and nobody's saying he's Dirk, but certainly he's a facsimile of him in many ways. Mm-hmm. So if anybody could get a player who already who would fit into a system that is already designed for a player a little bit like that, that would make sense. So yeah. I know some people are absolutely some people in Dallas, some writers and other people just analyzing the team are absolutely against him for various reasons and don't want to, especially since Dirk is still here, and don't want to have 2 players like that. But I'm not. He's not my first choice. He's down the list a little ways, but I think that they could probably make him work here. My biggest concern is just that his ceiling isn't high enough, and that he would never be someone more than a Ryan Anderson type or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that it'd be really tough for me to pick between Ntilikina and Markkanen, and the reason, and that's just for them particularly. The reason I say that is just because I know that Rick Carlisle would design all of these crazy sets to get him free for open shots and to utilize, his burgeoning post game. I think that Dallas would be a really, really good landing spot for him just for so many reasons that, would eventually allow him to get the best out of his game. But I definitely understand the hesitancy. It's a lot of pressure to put on a kid from Finland, becoming this first player, I think, from Finland or second player to ever make the NBA from Finland, just how Dirk was among the first German players to ever make the league. The comparisons would be impossible to just, eventually, stop at, because he is, they're similar in a lot of ways, but there's only one Dirk Nowitzki, and it would be very large shoes to fill.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is that historically the Mavericks do tend to draft for upside over consistency, and I think in this draft that would be the right way to approach it once again, since they still don't have a true number one. Not that Ntilikina necessarily has that potential, but certainly his ceiling is a lot less known than someone like Markkanen. So that's the other argument I would say in Ntilikina's favor over someone like Markkanen.
Okay, so 2 things before I let you out of here. I want to run one crazy trade idea past you before I let you go. Wesley Matthews back to Portland for one of Portland's either 15th or 20th overall picks, and it'd probably have to be Alan Crabb, maybe. What do you think of that deal?
How much is Crabb making again?
$18 million a year. So
it would be more or less a swap, because I guess Wes is a little bit higher, so you'd save a little bit of money. Yeah, I'd probably do that. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I like that is because, Portland is closer to competing. Wes Matthews is just a better player than Alan Crabb. He's a better two-way player, really sits down and defends, did a great job taking on a lot of the toughest defensive assignments for Dallas this year. That's really what Portland needs in the backcourt, a guy that can take on those tough assignments from C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard. Portland, I don't think, is going to use all 3 of their draft selections. I don't think that they have a need for 3 rookies. So why not send over Alan Crabb as just a straight swap in terms of salary, essentially, and the number 20 overall pick for a guy that can really help you for the next 2 years.
Yeah. The one thing, the one reason they might not do that is just Matthews' presence in the locker room, which everything you've heard about it is true and then some. But certainly as the team has actively tried to get younger, that's a chance to get younger once again and shed a little bit of salary, pick up a draft pick or something like that. That would also help you get younger. So I would say sure, but they may feel differently just because of what he's able to do for the young players on that team.
Okay, and then the last thing I want to do before I let you out of here, one bold prediction for this offseason from Tim Cato over at Mavs Moneyball and SB Nation.
Oh, man, I actually wrote a piece about this, and what was my boldest one? Oh, yeah, my bold prediction would be that Seth Curry actually has a lot of trade talk or trade rumors that go his way, just because of how well he played and the fact that he'd be basically thrown into any deal. You can package him with any veteran player. for a big name, or you can also trade him for some something smaller, but maybe even a higher pick. I don't think he ends up getting traded, but I do think you hear his name in the trade market a little bit, just because he's making $3 million. 1 year deal worth $3 million. It's possible the Mavericks, they really like him, but it's possible they don't want to pay him in 2018. So I don't think they end up trading him, but I do think his name gets thrown out there a lot.
Well, one problem for Seth Curry here is that either, and it goes both ways, right? The Mavericks and the team that would be acquiring him would only have early bird rights on him, which would mean they can really only go to around 175% of his salary at $3 million, which would be like $5 million for him to sign him. If you're over the cap, you would have to be under the cap to sign him to something larger, and it would depend on how far under the cap you are to be able to sign him to something larger. So it's a great idea, and I think it's also very tricky, though.
Yeah, for someone who I think when he started, he was averaging like 15 on 48 and 43 or 42. That's not going to cut it. I don't think. I think he's going to be. Yeah, no. When he moved into the starting rotation in the second half of the year, he played better basketball than I could have imagined. So
I think that if he was on the market this year, he would get like probably $10 million a year.
Yeah, for sure.
So it would be a little bit tricky, but Tim Cato, please tell the people what you're working on, where they can find your work, anything that you really want to tell them.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm on Twitter, Tim_Cato, CATO, and then I'm just working away SBNation.com. We're covering the playoffs, we're covering the finals. We've got some fun things coming, so just keep up with our coverage and all that, and I guess I should mention my book too. I wrote a Mavericks book that should be out in November. So 100 things Mavericks fans should know and do before you die. So if you hit up the Twitter, it will be heavily promoted there when the time comes. So look for that.
That is awesome to hear. You should go follow Tim. Does a great job for SB Nation over at Mavs Moneyball and on the main site. Thanks a lot, Tim, for coming on. I really appreciate your time. The next voice you're going to hear is me with Tony Jones talking about the Utah Jazz.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, we're here now with Tony Jones from over at the Salt Lake Tribune. How's it going, man?
I'm good, Sam. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
It's a yearly thing. We got to talk draft, because the thing that I appreciate about you more than just about any other beat writer in the country is that you actually pay attention to college basketball, and you know about these draft prospects at a much higher level than I feel like any other beat writer in the country does.
Well, those are nice words. I'm not sure if that lets you know how crazy I am. I don't know if that's a good thing or if that's a bad thing, but I feel it's one of the things that's like kind of our job.
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to, the off season, is increasingly, as the years go by, it gets more and more important. So I think that, that's one of the things that you as a writer and as your job, that's one of the things that you want to stay on top of, especially for your fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, for the podcast numbers in terms of people that listen, they are much stronger right now than they were during the season. And I think that's in part because people are a lot more interested in the off season now almost than they are in, fucking March basketball in the NBA.
Right. Exactly. So, I think, when I was a college basketball beat writer, I thought that one of the most important parts of the job was staying on top of recruiting. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's kind of like the same thing, when you're covering the NBA, they want you, the fan base wants you to stay on top of who their team is going to draft next. And, as you look at the Utah Jazz, I mean, they're annually, with Dennis Lindsey, he's annually one of the most aggressive GMs in the league when it comes to draft time. So, you want to be able to, if he makes a trade or if he trades up into the lottery or if he drafts, Jonathan Jam from France. I hope I pronounced his name right. You want to be able to tell your fan base who these guys are.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And the Jazz in particular, like you said, have been very aggressive, and they've also picked high in a number of recent drafts. And this year it finally paid off. So let's kind of set the table here for what happened in this Utah Jazz season. They went 51-31, beat the Clippers in the first round of the playoffs in 7 games. They get swept by Golden State. George Hill was injured. There were a variety of reasons why that went down the way it went down. Basically, though, I remember talking to you in the preseason, and we were really excited about this Jazz team. We were talking about, this team is finally going to be a team that you can cover and be a winner and go to the playoffs and win maybe 50 games. And basically everything like that happened. I mean, they really just lived up to the lofty expectations that were set for them by many fans and many pundits in the preseason.
Yeah, and you know what? And here's the thing. I thought, even with the way they played this year, even with how well they played this year, I thought that they left wins on the table. Mm-hmm. I thought they left at least 4 to 6 wins on the table. That they probably would have gotten had they been healthy.
Yep.
Statistically, this was one of the 3 most injured teams in the league in the NBA this year. When you talk about player games missed, and when you also talk about impact of the players missed. So, the Jazz really played well. They became an elite defensive team, but they also countered that with a balanced, measured, efficient offense, and then you tripled that with a team that kept possessions low. So if you were an opponent of the Jazz this year, you had to deal with the fact that you weren't going to get the league average in possessions per game. You were facing a team that had Rudy Gobert as a backstop. So that basically took away, anything that you were going to get into the paint. So you had to shoot a really, really good percentage from 3-point range on that night. And you had to defend an offense that was I believe they finished around 11th or 12th.
Yep.
Overall. So, they really did a lot of things right this season. And they did it with, a core that hasn't yet reached its prime. And they did it with, sprinkling that in with veteran leadership like George Hill and Joe Johnson and Boris Diaw. So if you look at what they've done, I mean, you can see that they've set themselves up for, if things go right this summer, this is a team that I think that next year has the potential to be the second best team in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I don't think that would surprise anyone, especially with the uncertainty in San Antonio right now, the uncertainty in Los Angeles right now. I kind of think that Houston overachieved a little bit this year, whereas Utah, like you said, underachieved a little bit just due to the injuries. And it would not be crazy, I think, to anyone to see the Jazz move up to that number 2 spot in the West if Gordon Hayward decides to return. And that is kind of the tricky question here, right? Because Hayward's going to have a lot of options on the table for him this summer. So he can sign, if he just wants to extend out as far as he can. I believe that the number is 5 years, $175 million contract with the Jazz. 4-year contract, I think, would look right around like 130. A 1+1, I think, would be like $62 million or something like that, and would allow him to opt out and potentially make the All-NBA team next year and get up to that next level, which would be projected at something like 37-ish, I think.
35% of the cap.
Right, and I was trying to do the math in my head on how much it would cost in millions. But yeah, it'd be going from 30% of the cap to 35% of the cap. And that would just be, I mean, it'd be a risk for him to take, but I don't think that it would be that crazy. I almost think that the 1+1 for him is the one that makes the most sense, or even maybe a 2+1 that allows him to hit free agency after 2 years in Utah, and then maybe try and make the All-NBA team. It's a really fascinating situation because there are so many options on the table.
Right. In the Supermax, the new Supermax provision, which allows your incumbent player to get 35% of the cap, that's gonna, you're gonna see Gordon Hayward's probably right now, I would say one of the first, maybe the first, kind of, I don't want to say guinea pig, but I mean, he's one of the first examples of, how many options that you can have. Because, if I'm Gordon Hayward right now, you can easily say, hey, I want to bet on myself. I'm going to opt out. I'm going to sign a 1-and-1, get the max, and I'm going to bet on myself that I can have a year next year where I'm going to be good enough to make an All-NBA team. And, and that's, you talk about generational money, any guy who qualifies and receives the Supermax, they're taking care of their family, they're taking care of their kids, they're taking care of their grandkids. It's hard to blow that kind of money.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here's the thing with Gordon Hayward. You can opt out. You can take that 1-and-1. You can bet on yourself. And if you make All-NBA, then you opt out. You opt out of the 1-and-1, obviously, and you sign the Supermax for the 35% of the cap. If not, well, guess what? The Utah Jazz are going to be like, guess what, Gordon? You know what? I mean, we don't want you anymore, because you didn't make All-NBA. No, they're going to be like, we're still going to give you that 5 years.
Yep.
And we're still going to give you that max. We're still going to give you that max contract. And even I think even if the worst happened and Gordon Hayward got hurt, he's still going to get the max, the 5-year max from the Jazz. Mm-hmm. So I think that you're right in that sense where opting out and signing that 1-and-1. It makes a lot of sense. And I think, obviously Gordon Hayward made, the All-Star team this year. I voted him third team All-NBA because I thought that he was that good. So I think, nationally, and I think, the Jazz have a chance to be good enough next year, where he has enough momentum that if he has the same kind of year that he had this year, that I think that if he does the same thing next year, not only does that land him on the All-Star team, but I think that gives him a chance to land on an All-NBA team as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with you too. And, I would have had him as my 7th forward of the 6 guys that made, 6 guys make an All-NBA forward roster. I would have had him 7th. But the fact that I think the national consensus on him has risen to the point where I think he was 7th or 8th on that list among the official votes, it says that if the Jazz do what they're supposed to do next year, stay healthy, win 55 games, be second place in the Western Conference, he is going to be an All-NBA player. I think that is pretty fair to say. So it's a stacked league and it's a risk, but I think that there's also the matter as well that he's already made $57 million in his career. That's not necessarily generational money. You add $30 million to that this year if he signs a 1-and-1. That's around $87 million in terms of what he will have made throughout his career. Like you said, the Jazz aren't going to go away. Even if he tears his ACL, he would still probably get, worst comes to worst here, and it's like the worst ACL tear that we can imagine. I can't see the Jazz offering him less than $4,100. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
right, exactly.
The 1-and-1 makes the most sense for him. And ultimately, I guess it depends as well. Does he think the 1-and-1 makes the most sense in Utah, or does it make the most sense elsewhere? If he's willing to just kind of get rid of the designated veteran player exception and just sign with Boston, for instance, or sign wherever else he will consider in free agency, and then try and make the All-NBA team there and still be eligible for a 4-year higher-end max contract.
Well, the question with Gordon is, you know, is there somewhere around the league, you know, that's a better fit for him? I mean, you know, having covered Gordon for 3 years, you know, this guy, he wants to win. He wants to win a championship. And, you know, that's his motivation. That's what he wants to do. He's 27 years old. He just turned 27. So, you know, he's entering his prime years. You know, so he wants to win a championship. So, you know, obviously, you know, this has been widely reported, and this is true. You know, the Boston Celtics are going to make a play for him in free agency. So, you know, the question is, you know, is there a better basketball situation out there for Gordon Hayward than there is for the Jazz? I don't necessarily think so, because I think that if you're a wing player or if you're a point guard, I think that you absolutely, positively, 150% want to play with Rudy Gobert for as long as you can, because I think Rudy Gobert is the best center in the league, and I think that he's a guy who doesn't eat up possessions offensively, and he's a guy who erases a lot of mistakes defensively.
He makes life easy.
You know, so he makes life a lot easy. He makes life easy for you. You know, so, and I think that when you look at the front office that the Jazz have, I mean, I think it's a really, really good front office. You know, so I think that, you know, when you look at those two, I think, and then you look at the fact that you have that Supermax provision, I think there are a lot of reasons to stay in Utah for Gordon Hayward. You know, obviously, when you look at the Boston Celtics, you know, they put themselves in a great spot. They have the number 1 pick this year. I think they should use it and draft Markelle Fultz. But not only that, you know, they have a potential to have a top 5 pick next year. So what if that top 5 pick turns into Bamba from Texas, or it turns into Michael Porter from Missouri, or it turns into the kid from Spain? I forget his name, but you know, who's really, really good. You know, so, you know, they put themselves in a really, really good position, and I think that Boston Celtics should use their draft picks instead of trading for, say, a Jimmy Butler, because, you know, Jimmy Butler's not getting you past LeBron James right now. You know, what you have to do is wait LeBron James out. And if you draft Markelle Fultz right now, he's 19 years old. By the time he's 25, hopefully LeBron will have slowed down sufficiently enough by then where you can pass him up when he's 38 years old.
Yep.
You know, so I think that's what you have to weigh with with Gordon Hayward. Now, I will say that the Jazz have done, you know, just everything in their power to keep Hayward. You know, Hayward said last year, hey, you know, he went to management and said, I need to know that this is going somewhere. Dennis Lindsey responded by having a really great offseason in terms of acquiring George Hill, acquiring Boris Diaw, acquiring Joe Johnson, and, you know, they went out and won 50 games. So, you know that, you know, there's upside there. You know, it's a young core, so there's more upside there. And obviously we talked about what the Jazz could be, but obviously the elephant in the room with the Western Conference is how long are the Golden State Warriors going to be, you know, one of the 5 best teams in basketball history, and how close can you come to toppling them? So that's the question, you know, for Gordon Hayward has to face if he stays with the Jazz.
Yeah, and the thing with Boston, too, is, I mean, you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about Jimmy Butler as well. Does Gordon Hayward fit their long-term calculations if they plan to use both of these draft picks? Because if they go out and sign Gordon Hayward, I think that they're best off just pushing all in going for it and going out and trading that 2018 pick for Jimmy Butler or whoever and taking a 3-year run at it and seeing if you can beat LeBron James and just seeing where it goes. But is that best for them? Are they better off waiting out LeBron and having these draft picks and having everything that goes along with them? I think it's a really tricky question that Boston is going to have to weigh in terms of, is it worthwhile for them to pay max money for Gordon Hayward, and is Gordon Hayward going to be happy there? You mentioned George Hill going out and trading for him. He's obviously the second part of this equation. I think that move worked out better than even Dennis Lindsey could have planned for whenever he went out and acquired George Hill. He had what I believe was his best offensive season in Utah this year. Again, definitely helps to have Rudy Gobert, who's one of the best screeners in the NBA, to allow George Hill to get space. He plays really, really well off ball, which works well with Gordon Hayward, who can play on the ball as a wing a little bit. There are just a lot of factors, though, in terms of how much do you think George Hill's decision will tie in with Gordon Hayward's decision? How likely do you think it is that one re-signs and one does not?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a really decent chance that one does resign and one doesn't resign. Obviously the Jazz are all in on trying to keep Gordon. But the sense that I get with George Hill is, hey, the Jazz are gonna bid for George. They're gonna pay him, but they're gonna pay him to a point. If the Brooklyn Nets, who I've heard are rumored to be, interested in George, if the Brooklyn Nets go out and offer George a max contract, then the Jazz are just, they're going to shake hands with George, and they're going to say, hey, we were really, really happy to have you for this one year, and we really don't begrudge you for going out and getting your money. And, they're going to say goodbye. But if the Jazz can keep him at, say, $15 to $18 million per year, over 3 of the next 4 years, I think that, that's a palatable deal for what Dennis Lindsey can kind of swallow. So, the question with George is, this is the question with George. He played 49 games this season. He had a toe injury that just simply wouldn't heal. And anybody who plays basketball knows that, your big toe is really, really important for running and cutting, and it's just
you just push off of it constantly.
So, yeah, I mean, it was like turf toe, So it was something that, once it really flared up with George, it just nothing but a summer was going to heal it. So the question is, was that a 1 year thing as he's 31 years old, or is this something that's going to be, chronic? Is his body breaking down, or was it just a freak thing? Now, George Hill, George has always been a guy who's kept in terrific shape. He's always in excellent shape, I talked to him before locker room clean out, and he was like, hey, I'm going to be just fine this summer. I'm going to come back healthy. So so you question that is he still durable? Because this is basically the first year in his career where he's really had major injury. So is he still durable going forward? And how long does his game hold up? So I think that he's a lot like Chauncey Billups, who was still a starting caliber NBA point guard all the way up until he was about 35 years old. Because, George is cerebral. He doesn't rely on speed to get where he wants to go. He has long arms. He has great instincts. He's a great defender. So I still think that if you sign him to a 3 to 4 year contract, that he's still, going to be a starting caliber or a really good point guard, at least through the first 3 years. So maybe that fourth year, it kind of looks kind of Tony Parker-ish, like Tony Parker's contract is going to look next year. But those first 3 years, you're still going to have, one of the 10 to 12 best point guards in the league.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You kind of mentioned $17 or $18 million is his sweet spot for the Jazz. I don't think there's any way that he's getting under like $25 million. I mean, he's just, like you said, he's going to age reasonably well due to what he does on the floor. And he was just so darn good this year. Like, he was fucking unbelievable in the games that he played, and he's a really great fit in a lot of situations because he's able to play off the ball as well as on the ball. I guess that my question is, do you think that they would be willing to pay $25 million? Because I think that he'll even have an offer at, like 3 years, $97 million, which is like his max essentially. I think that he'll get that kind of offer, but do you think that they would be willing to even go up to like 25 or so per year?
Well, I think if you say, hey, if George says, hey, I have, a 3-year, $80 million offer on the table from the Brooklyn Nets. If the Jazz came back and said, okay, we'll give you 3 years, $80 million, but we'll give you a 4th year at a team option, then possibly that's, enough to sway because, would you rather be playing for $80 million with the Brooklyn Nets, or would you rather be playing for $80 million over the next 3 years for the Utah Jazz?
Right.
And I think the option at the end of the contract could be a really big thing for George because, if he's able to get a 4th year or a 5th year at a player option, then, obviously that's going to be, for the whatever team is willing to throw in that player option, it's going to be a big thing. Now, the big thing here is that the Jazz hold George's bird rights. So that's a big thing. So they can go over the cap to re-sign him. So I do think, if the Jazz see that there's not another really, really great option out there, and they really want to keep this team together, and I think that there is a chance that they'll consider a 23, 24, even $25 million deal. And also, what do the Jazz do with Dante Exum? Yeah. And how do they view him? What do they view him as? Is he a point guard? Is he a shooting guard? Will he be ready to take over this team, in a year or 2 years, or, is it going to take 3 years, or is he still, or do they want to keep him at all? They really have to start, they're going to get to the point where they have to start making a decision on Dante because he's going to enter restricted free agency after next season. So, like you said, there are just so many layers of, what can happen with Utah's offseason. It's really going to be fascinating to cover.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think the interesting part about George Hill as it kind of pertains to Dante Exum is that, as we've said, both of us have said, George is good at playing off the ball. That fits with however you want to develop Exum, right? The versatility of what George Hill can do and the versatility of what Gordon Hayward can do. Even keeping both of those guys, I don't really think it's going to stunt Dante Exum's growth all that much because you're still talking about a player who can get his reps in either on or off the ball as a 20-minute per game guy, kind of as a bench player on a really, really good basketball team. So I think it's okay that Exum is kind of coming along slowly after the knee injury. And, he had that very nice game. I believe it was in game 4 of the Golden State series. He's either 3 or 4. I can't remember now, but we'll see what happens with him. I'm not sold on him in either direction right now. And I think that in that regard, Utah would probably be best off keeping the status quo.
Well, I think the one thing with Dante is he's a wild card, and I think he gives the Jazz something that they don't have,
Yeah.
They don't have that guy who's just a flat-out athlete.
Yep.
And Dante is a flat-out athlete. And he can play the 1, he can play the 2. I think that by the time he's 25, he's going to be big enough body mass-wise that he's going to be able to even play some 3 in spots. And, the thing with Dante, he's a little headstrong. And, right now he views himself as a point guard.
Yep.
And he wants to play the point guard. And you can't begrudge him from feeling that way because, when I was 21 years old, well, darn it, I wanted to play the point guard no matter what. That was my position.
Yep.
So
Dante's come up his whole life playing point guard.
Right. So you can't be upset at him because he wants to ply his trade, at his position of choice. And I think the one thing with Dante, he's so athletic and he's got, so much raw speed and he's still got such an upside, that if you're the Jazz, you'd just be kind of foolish to get rid of him as long as you have team control over him, right? So
totally
no matter what he gets, no matter what he gets in restricted free agency next year, you're going to match that because, I think that, by the time he's 24, 25, if this kid keeps developing, you might have a star in your hands. Now, you might not, but you might still have a star in your hands because he's got that much upside. So,
and you're talking about a team that then would be maxed out anyway because you're hopefully keeping Gordon Hayward, you're hopefully keeping George Hill at that money. Derrick Favors, we'll talk about here in a second, but he has money on the books at least. We'll see long term what you think they should do there. Rodney Hood's coming up as well for a potential extension here. So they're going to be capped out on some level, so it makes sense to just keep Dante.
Right. It makes sense to keep him. And the thing is, the goal is, and this is the same thing with the Celtics. This is why I feel like the Celtics should just go ahead and use their draft picks. The goal isn't to be good for 1 year, 2 years. The goal is to be good continuously for 10 years. So in order to do that, if you're Dennis Lindsey, you've got to develop Dante Exum. You have to develop Trey Lyles. You have to, keep developing. You have to keep developing Rodney Hood. I mean, you just have to keep developing the guys that you draft. So as people come in or as people move out, you got people in a replacement. Ready to step up in roles. That's what the Spurs have done. For essentially 20 years. Since 1997, that's what they've done, and that's what they continue to do. When Tim Duncan started declining, well, guess what? That Kawhi Leonard was at a point where he was ready to take over. That's what Pat Riley did in the Showtime era when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. When he started to decline, that's when Magic Johnson was ready to be, one of the three best players in the NBA. So I think that that's what the goal is with the Jazz, and I think that that's one of the reasons why, you just have to keep Dante Exum, and you just have to stay by him, and you have to stick with him and keep developing him, and hope that that he's ready when his time is truly here.
Yeah, and the Jazz also do a great job of keeping their draft picks as well. That's why they are looking at 4 draft picks right now, in this NBA draft. We'll talk about that in a second, though. Rodney Hood is up for a potential extension. He was a little bit less than what I thought he would be this year, and I think it was just due to injury, essentially. Took a small step back, I would say. I would imagine that they're probably going to hold off on a negotiation for an extension because he probably believes that he is worthy of something similar to the max. The Jazz probably aren't willing to go there yet. So I would think that it makes sense to just kind of extend this into restricted free agency next offseason, right?
Yeah, I think I would say right now I would be shocked if the two sides came to a deal. I think that the only way that they do come to a deal in October is if it's a team-friendly thing, maybe an Alec Burks-ish type deal. And, I just don't see...
Oh, yeah, Alec Burks is on this roster.
Yes, Alec Burks is on the roster, And I just don't see Rodney's people doing that because I think the data is there. I think they know that, when he's healthy, he's a really good player, and I think that one of the reasons why why his shooting fell off, why he couldn't get into the lane as much this year was just because of the fact that he had to deal with his knee thing, and but the thing with Rodney is, when he's healthy, I think he's terrific. I think he's a guy who can score at all 3 levels.
Yep.
I think that he's a guy who can run pick and roll. He can do just so many different things. But he's got to prove that he can stay healthy. This is, he's been with the Jazz for 3 years, and he's battled some kind of injury all 3 years. And he's missed, pretty much significant time all 3 years. So, when he's healthy, he's really, really good. The question is, can he stay healthy? And the other question is, can he, I don't want to say stay out of his own head, but, can he be mentally healthy in terms of, being aggressive when he's on the floor, not passing up jump shots, just keep doing, keep being Rodney Hood. Because I think that he can be a guy who can score 20 points a game. I think that he's, Michael Redd with more variety to his game at his peak. So I think that he can be that. And, the question is, does he believe that? And can he believe that he can be that? And can he go out and execute that?
Yeah, no, I totally believe that Rodney Hood can score 20 points a game over the course of a full NBA season. You bring up the injuries, and maybe that is a reason that he might be willing to engage on a team-friendly contract. Maybe he does decide, what if I can't stay healthy, and what if my body just continues to break down on me? But, like we kind of said at the top, I would be surprised if that ends up being the case. Derrick Favors is the last guy I kind of want to mention here. Well, I want to talk about Joe Ingles real quick, but let's talk about Favors because this thing kind of went a different way than what I think everyone hoped for this season with him. What are your kind of impressions on where Derrick Favors is going to end up with the Jazz going forward?
Well, I think the Jazz keep him this summer. I think that, they keep him into next season, and they see where it goes. I think if Derrick comes back, and this is another guy with a lot of ifs, if he comes back and, he's 2015, 2016 Derrick Favors, then all of a sudden you have one of the most unique and imposing front courts in the league because, when Favors is healthy, you put him in the same front court as Rudy Gobert, and all of a sudden not only are you have one shot blocker and then you have another shot blocker, but you have Derrick Favors who can legitimately guard stretch power forwards on the perimeter. So, that's one of those things. And if I'm the Jazz, I mean, you're only paying them $12 million next year.
Yeah.
I think that, unless you know that George Hill isn't coming back, and you have to use Derrick Favors to get another point guard in there to keep Gordon Hayward, then I think you keep him. But the thing is, if Derrick Favors is anywhere near 2015, 2016 Derrick Favors, he's getting $100 million on the free market.
Yep.
And the Jazz just can't pay that.
Yep.
And that's the thing. So, I think, that's a fascinating situation because, the Jazz want him to be right because it'll be really good for the health of their team. But at the same time, Derrick Favors healthy, Derrick Favors athletic, Derrick Favors, being Derrick Favors again, or 2015, 2016 Derrick Favors when he was, 16 points and 9 rebounds a game. The Jazz are almost certainly losing that player for nothing in unrestricted free agency next summer because they just simply can't afford to keep him.
Yeah, no, that's all right. They're just in a tough spot, it feels like, with him, and we'll have to see what happens. Joe Ingles, the last guy kind of that's a free agent that's really, really important on this roster. They do have bird rights on him. Had a really, really strong season this year off the bench for the Jazz, even moved into the starting lineup at times this year. Where do we think his market is? Because he's kind of a tough guy for me to gauge at 29 years old, going to be 30 next year. Very awkward game in a lot of ways, not necessarily a statistical darling, but a guy that fits just so many different schemes.
Yeah. Joe, I think, gets a 3-year, $30 million offer on the market, and then the Jazz just match, and that's it. I don't know how much his status as a restricted free agent is going to throw teams off. Mm-hmm. But I'm just 95 to 96 to 97% sure that barring somebody offering him $200 million, Joe Ingles is going to be back with the Jazz next year. I just don't see him, going anywhere else. Here's the thing with Joe. He is so valuable in his system because he can play 3 positions. Yep. He can guard 4 positions, which the Jazz, in their wildest dreams, could not imagine when they first acquired him.
Well, I mean, they got him off the scrap heap from the Clippers.
Well, they got him off the scrap heap from let's just put it this way. If Joe Ingles is playing for the Clippers right now, do the Jazz win that series?
No, they don't.
They don't win that series. Now, and how ironic is that?
It's unbelievable.
If Doc Rivers kept Jared Cunningham over Joe Ingles.
Oh, Doc. That's a conversation.
Now Jared is a nice point guard. I really loved him at Oregon State. Come on, man.
I mean,
really?
that's a conversation for another day. Just the craziness that has been Doc Rivers' regime as general manager. Oh my God, that might be worth a full podcast.
So I mean, we're all like, well, why can't the Clippers get a functioning small forward? Well, they have one.
Yeah,
so,
that would have fit them perfectly.
That would have fit them perfectly. But so that's the thing with Joe. He's gonna get paid, but he wants to stay with the Jazz. He doesn't want to go anywhere else, and the Jazz don't want to let him go. And guess what? Joe Ingles and Gordon Hayward are pretty much close to bosom buddies.
Yeah.
So I mean, Joe is a huge priority for the Jazz this summer. Even if somebody gives them a crazy offer, 3 and 45, something like that, the Jazz are just going to match the offer, and they're going to figure it out later. I mean, Joe Ingles isn't going anywhere, and if Rodney Hood comes back healthy and he comes back right, then Joe Ingles becomes one of the 5 or 6 best off the bench players in the league.
Yep.
So I just think that he's one of those guys that's really important to the Jazz, and I don't see him going anywhere.
Yeah, I think that you're probably right on that. Let's talk draft before I let you go here. 20, let me look at the picks here. I have them written down. It's 24, 30, 42, and 55. Like I said, the Jazz have done a great job at mining talent throughout the NBA draft. And this year, they have 2 late first-round picks where they're going to be able to get guys under contracts for 4 years. I think that's really important for the kind of growth that we discussed earlier in terms of just having talent filter in and filter out of this organization that is never necessarily going to be this big market, $150 million, $170 million team that, a team like Cleveland or a team like Golden State is going to be in the future. So who do you have your eye on at 24 and 30? I imagine it's going to be a similar level player for the Jazz.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people. We've talked about this on Twitter before. In our DMs. I love Juwan Evans.
Yes,
really, really love him, and I think that he's a perfect fit for the Jazz. And if he's available at 24, I think the Jazz need to look long and hard at him. I really like Kyle Kuzma at one of those spots, maybe 30. I really like DJ Wilson. Jonathan, how do you pronounce Jonathan's last name?
Jonathan John. John.
Jonathan John. Okay. John. He's a guy, and he and Rudy Gobert have the same agent. Mm-hmm. And, Rudy Gobert's agent has told me that, he can actually, play power forward in spots, if you develop him that way. So that's another, that's another, what's the word I'm trying to use?
Draft and stash option.
Yes,
but
that's another option.
He does want to come over.
Option.
Yeah, he does want to come over.
Yeah, he wants
to
come over right now.
But
well, I think the Jazz need another. They need another front court guy. I think they need another center.
This is a great draft for that too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Tony Bradley just stayed in the draft. Why he stayed in the draft, I don't know. But anyway.
Like Bam Adebayo is going to be there probably at 24 with the way that this draft goes. Ike Onabogu, I think, has a shot.
I like Bam, but, is he cut out to play in Quinn's system? Because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think Bam's a tweener. I'm not sure he's a center. And, I'm not sure he's skilled enough to play the 4 right now. In today's NBA, so right now, to me, he's an undersized center who's really athletic. So he's going to be interesting. TJ Leaf will be there at 24, maybe.
Yeah.
Luke Kennard. Luke Kennard, that's another guy that you look at. Tyler Lydon, Caleb Swan. There's so many guys. Here's the thing.
Jordan Bell.
Jordan Bell. Here's the thing. I think the Jazz are going to be able to get a quality player at 24, a quality player at 30, and a quality player at 42.
Yep. That's entirely true. In this draft, it seems like there are 45 guys that I feel okay about having NBA careers. I don't know if they're going to be like rotation players, but
right.
It's hard for me to say that a guy like Jonathan Motley, who has stayed in the draft, isn't going to be an NBA player. Like, he's just so mobile and he's athletic and, he can shoot the ball a little bit, really developed as a passer and defender this year. You look at a guy like, Ivan Rabb is a guy that a lot of people like that I'm not super duper high on, but he makes sense in a lot of ways. Justin Patton is a high upside guy that you can see a team like Utah being like, okay, we have 4 picks. We'll take a shot on finding Rudy Gobert's long-term backup. There are just so many different dudes out there that make a lot of sense. And I think that DJ Wilson, the guy who ends up staying in the draft out of Michigan, we're recording this on Wednesday, and he did that today. DJ Wilson is a guy who can shoot the ball, pick and pop a little bit, can block weak side shots. That makes sense for the way that Utah wants to play. He's mobile, he's athletic, can handle a little bit, not really all that much yet, but, so many options.
Here's the question I have with DJ Wilson. Essentially, he's another Trey Lyles.
That's true.
If you draft DJ Wilson or if you draft Kyle Kuzma, does that mean that you're giving up on what you think Trey Lyles can be?
Oh, yeah, I forgot Trey Lyles was on this roster, by the way, for a second.
Yeah, and that's the question you have to ask yourself, because DJ Wilson and Kyle Kuzma are both playmaking power forwards.
Yeah.
And so you already have one of those guys that you drafted 2 years ago, over Devin Booker, I may add. And, all right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. But, the question is, if you take one of those guys, does that mean that you have given up on Trey Lyles?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Trey Lyles last year, I think we were in Vegas and sitting there watching Trey, and he was, was he MVP?
Awesome.
Like, he averaged like 29 a game. Like, he was super good. I do wonder if it's just a case of he got like 15, 16 minutes a game, but, maybe he does just need slightly more consistent time.
Yeah, well, I think Trey played really well. I mean, I don't want to say really well, but I think he played reasonably well in his rookie year. And I think that he played reasonably well, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was no Derrick Favors, there was no Rudy Gobert. So guess what? If you miss a shot, if you turn the ball over, if you miss 3 shots in a row, guess what? You're not coming out. It was the Willie Beeman thing.
Yeah.
When Coach Tony said, "Hey, it doesn't matter how many interceptions you throw because I have nobody else."
Yeah.
So you're not coming out, and that gives a player a certain confidence. They know that they can play through stuff, and Trey Lyles did not have that this year because if he missed a shot, if he missed 2 shots, guess what? There was Joe Johnson, there was Derrick Favors, there was Boris Diaw. I mean, there was just so many other options that Quinn Snyder could turn to.
Jeff Whitby.
And, Jeff Whitby, who I don't expect to be back with the Jazz next year.
Yeah.
So I think that the Jazz at some point are going to draft a big, whether it be a forward or whether it be a center, I definitely think Jonathan John is a real possibility if he's available at one of those spots. But yeah, I do know that they like DJ Wilson. I do know that they like Kyle Kuzma. But me and you are on the same page. I think that Juwan Evans should be somebody that the Jazz take a really, really long look at on draft night.
I just released my big board today. I have Juwan Evans at like 15. I mean, it's hard for me to see how he fails in the NBA. Like, he can just get such separation. He's a solid shooter already. He has a really great floater game. Yeah, he led the number one goddamn offense in the country this year with no other NBA talent around him. It's hard for me to see how that guy fails.
Yeah, I mean, somebody will look at him and be like, hey, he's 5'11". He doesn't have great size. But I look at him, and, I mean, you hate to throw this word around. He has a 6'6" wingspan. You hate to throw this word around, Sam, but, I mean, he has some Chris Paul on him. Because he's so good in terms of running a pick and roll, and he can score at 3 levels, and he's a dog defensively.
Yeah.
He's a guy that, teams are not going to be able to just like, hey, he's 5'11". Let's go at him like we go at Isaiah Thomas from the Boston Celtics. It's not going to go down like that with him. He's just a dog defensively. He puts a lot of ball pressure on you. He plays really good help side. And as you said, he played with an Oklahoma State team, whose second best player, was a 5'10" shooting guard. So, I mean, I'm right on this.
No, they Jeffrey Carroll. Jeffrey Carroll's pretty good, but like
Jeffrey Carroll was pretty good.
But like, you're right. Like, Phil Forte is their third best player, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So
it is what it is.
I just think that he's a guy who I think that he's rotational right away.
Yeah.
Depending on what you do at that point guard spot. So it'll be interesting to see what the Jazz do. But I mean, just because they're picking 24 and 30, doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to get a guy who could come in and help right away. Because I think that this draft is good enough for that to happen.
Yeah, and it might be interesting for them to maybe consider moving, depending on if they end up with Jonathan John, or they can end up with maybe a stash down the road at like 42. It wouldn't be like insane to me to see them move one of these 2 first-round picks for like a future first-round pick and just like take a flyer on one and continue to replenish the pipeline, so to speak, because they could potentially just have way too many rosterable guys, right? Like, they might just end up with Gordon Hayward, Derrick Favors, Joe Johnson, Alec Burks, George Hill, Dante Exum, Trey Lyles, Joe Ingles, Rudy Gobert, Rodney Hood, and Joel Bolomboy is still on a guarantee for next year even too. So like, that's a lot of guys that you might conceivably have on your roster, and with 2 second-round picks in a draft where you could theoretically get a guy that you can give guaranteed money to immediately in the second round, maybe it does make sense. Try and move one of these picks for a future pick if a team is out there that really likes the depth of these big men in the draft.
Well, here's the question I have for you. I mean, if you move 24 and 30 and you see somebody at 15, I mean, does 24 and 30 get you to 15?
Well, definitely.
So how high can it get you?
I don't think it gets you to, because 15 is Portland, right? Like, 15, I think that, 15 is Portland. Portland already has 3 first-round picks. I don't think they need a 4th. 24 and 30, I think, might get you to like maybe 19 if Atlanta is just trying to build up picks. Maybe 18 if Indiana is just trying to build up picks. I don't think it's really getting you that much farther than that, though. Like, I don't think you're getting up into like late lottery. I don't think you're getting up to 15, 16, 17. But if a team is out there that really likes X player, or if the Jazz really like X player at 18, it wouldn't be insane to me, but I'm someone who does think at that level you should try and keep as many picks as possible. Just keep, even if you trade it out for a future pick, try and keep your stash of picks just so you can continue to replenish your roster with talent. Even if it's further down the road, even if you think that, Jonathan John, since he wants to come over immediately, he's not going to be a stash. So we're maybe not going to stash anyone this year. So we have to keep all of these, we have to keep trading the pick down the road if someone really likes a Bam Adebayo or a TJ Leaf or whoever at 24.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm looking at least in this draft. I mean, it's a really interesting offseason for Utah. We just talked about it for 50 minutes, and I was not anticipating that.
It was 50 of the easiest minutes ever, Sam.
It was. We didn't even talk about, we missed Jeff Withey. We missed Alec Burks. We missed, I'm just messing with you. I mean, we missed Boris Diaw, who, theoretically does have a non-guarantee, I think, this offseason. So, there's more we could talk about even.
If the Jazz wanted to make a trade during the draft or before free agency, you can throw Boris Diaw in there quite as easily because he has a non-guaranteed deal. So if a team wanted some cap relief, hey, throw Boris Diaw in there because of the nature of his contract. So, there's just so many things that the Jazz can do. It'll just be interesting to see how it all shakes out. We're less than a month away from it all happening.
Yeah, no, we definitely are. I mean, the Jazz this offseason could be one of the 5 most interesting teams long term in the NBA that could, theoretically become a title contender as soon as 2018, 2019, probably, just being realistic about it. Or they could end up, I don't want to say rebuilding because they do have Rudy and they have a bunch of guys that are talented, but, they could fall down to the 8th, 9th, 10th seed level. Yeah,
they could end up being, they could either be a 60-win team or they can be current Portland.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And it's a scary place to be, but it's going to make for an incredibly interesting offseason.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, all right, Tony.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on, man. Give everyone a plug for where they can follow you on Twitter, what you're writing right now, what kind of coverage that you have coming up here in the future.
Well, you can follow me at TribJazz, TribJazz. Or you can follow me at TJonesSLTrib, TJonesSLTRIB. Immediately coming up, I have a column talking about the competitive balance of the NBA. That'll run on Sunday, and whether it's a good thing or not. And next week, I will be doing the first of 2 pre-draft mock drafts. So
is this the first time you've done mock drafts?
I did a mock. I did a lottery mock last year, but I'm mocking the entire first round this year.
Yeah, I hate doing them. I'm doing them now I'm doing one for Sporting News. I'm doing another one for something coming up, and I hate doing them because they're just the easiest way to make you look dumb.
Well, the thing with mocks, and I did this when I was doing some NFL stuff. All it takes is one team to throw everything off balance.
Yep.
Like, if one team does something crazy, then your entire mock is done. Like, no matter what, because
Yep.
it just throws off the balance in the order of everything that you do. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. Thank you for listening, everyone. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, where you can please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We will be back next Monday. We're going to do a breakdown of the top 5 prospects in the NBA draft. Hopefully, I'll be able to get Cole Zwicker to come back on because you guys really enjoyed that last Monday. And keep it locked here. We're going to have a lot of great coverage doing team-based breakdowns. We're going to do a little bit more prospect-based stuff. I might try and get a couple of interviews coming up with some NBA draft prospects. So keep it locked here. And until next time, we will talk soon. Bye.